What does it take to be a good player at your table? Obviously, this is a pretty big question, and very vague at that, so I'm not going to be able to touch on everything. However, I do think it is a topic that warrants a lot of discussion because it's important to know how to be the best player at your table in the same way that it's important for DMs to know how to always be able to improve their craft. The simple fact of the matter is, if you're a player at the table, it is just as important for you to make sure that everybody at the table is having fun as it is the DM. So, inherently, in order to be a good player, it requires you to support the DM and, more importantly, support the other players at your table to make sure that everybody has the best time possible. After all, that's the whole point, everybody to come together and have an amazing time. So how does one do that? Well, let's figure that out. I want to talk about how to be the best player at your table for the DM and the players around you. So let's talk about that. Now, let's start off with the obvious here. There are a litany of other videos on this platform that talk about how to be the best player possible. Ginny D taking 20, XP to level 3, I mean, the possibilities are endless. And honestly, those are just the first 3 that popped up off the top of my head. I have seen so many videos and watched a ton about how to be the best kind of player. And do I think I'm going to be able to provide information that they haven't in the past? No, I really don't. I'm not going to be able to produce this brand new philosophy. That being said, I do have very specific things that I have noticed players at my table do that have been really helpful, and I just want to highlight that. After all, what's the point of DMing for the same group for this long if I haven't learned anything from them? So let's take a look at exactly what it is that I've learned from them and how to be the best player possible. And when it comes to being the best player possible, I really see 3 specific scenarios that need to be focused on in order to be able to achieve that goal. 1. Your dynamic with the DM. 2. Your dynamic with the other players. And 3. Your dynamic with your own character. Let's start with the dynamic with the DM. When it comes to the Dungeon Master, what exactly is it you're supposed to do as a player in order to be able to interact with them? There's the obvious, you play out your character, you run through their encounters, you pay attention to what it is they say, and you show interest in the plot hooks that they throw out. But that's just base level expectations. That's just playing the game. But how do you be a good player or even a great player when it comes to your DM? For my game specifically, and yes, a lot of this advice is for my games as it is my experience and my perspective, but for my game specifically, the best thing you can do as a player is interact with me as a DM on the things that you care about your character. Tell me what they feel, tell me what they experience, tell me what they care about, where you want them to go, and most importantly, where you want them to end up. See, I think it's really important for the DM to understand what it is you expect from your character so that the DM can help achieve that. If you want your character to go from some sort of naive child to a super badass by the end of the campaign, but don't communicate that with the DM may not lean into that fantasy. They might just continue to treat your character as the naive child, and why would they not? That's how you were treating them. But as they grow and try to evolve and change to the world around them, the NPCs might not treat them any differently. They might continue to treat them as the child you're trying to get this character to become something different from. And the reason for this is really simple. The simple fact of the matter is, not every DM has the ability to focus on specifically you at the table. If you take an action that is different from your usual character's actions and you expect the DM to take notice but they don't take offense of that. You are but one of many players at the table and they have to focus on all of them. They can't necessarily always focus on every little minute character detail. However, if you have highlighted to the DM, hey, this is where I want my character to go, I think they're going to start making these decisions. Even in just a simple message to them before the session starts can go a long way in helping the DM pick up on those small little cues. I once had a player play a character who was, well, racist, and it was meant to be one of the largest character flaws. They were also meant to be a narcissist and somebody who came from a past of being a pretty much tyrannical ruler who was trying to learn how to change. Unfortunately, the campaign itself did not lend a lot into being able to explore that for them and seeing different parts of themselves. And so that horrible part of him really didn't come out a whole lot. Most of the players didn't notice. It wasn't until this player came to me and began to discuss these parts of this character and how they wanted to explore them that I was able to sort of delve into that. And eventually they went on an adventure where they had to go back to the kingdom which he had tyrannically ruled and been kicked out of. They were even able to save this kingdom from the new tyrannical ruler who was ruling over them, and he was able to redeem himself even if it was just in some small part. But that never would have happened if he had not communicated to me what he was caring about in his character. And so that is the most important part, in my mind, of interacting with your DM. Communication on where you want the story to go and what you're hoping for. And also an understanding that the DM is in control of the story, and it may not go exactly where you want it to go, but as long as the two of you trust each other, you can lead it to a conclusion that is comfortable and satisfying for both of you. Which leads into section 2. How can you be a good player when it comes to the other players at your table? I actually have a super practical tip for this. The most important thing when it comes to the other players at your table is for you to care about their characters. Look, I get it. We all play D&D to feel cool, to have a good time, to be the main character. But sometimes it is just more important to focus on what everybody else is doing so that they can feel cool. And in turn, they'll do the same for you. For me, I always find it super simple as to just look at everybody else at the table, look at their characters, and identify one thing from each character that interests your character specifically. For example, I once played a very self-serving and narcissistic artificer. So what did he do? He looked at every single character at the table and identified exactly one thing he could get from them in order to better his own agenda. Was it harmful? Yeah, probably. I mean, he was not a good guy when the campaign started, but it allowed him to take an interest in the characters and not just dismiss their actions. If one of the characters did something inane or seemingly unimportant, he would be focused on that, because maybe, just maybe, it was going to affect exactly what he was paying attention to and what he cared about in that person. So it is important to identify for each character something important in that character that is important to your character, because that will allow you to focus on them and in character have a reason to care. Fun game, go back and count how many times I just said character in a single sentence and bully me in the comments below. But with that little tidbit out of the way, that leads us to the very last point. Your relationship with your character. Here's the deal. I've talked about this in the past, I'm not going to retread it, but your character is a part of you. And I think, personally, it is very important for you to have at least a basic idea of where you want this character to end up in the end of the campaign. And yes, D&D is collaborative storytelling based on dice. Inherently, you will never be able to actually plan where your character is going to end up. But it's important for you to know exactly where you want them to end up so you have a goal to shoot for, so you don't just end up meandering around. There's a concept in literature where nobody likes a stagnant protagonist. Nobody likes a protagonist who just lets things happen to them. Yes, a protagonist can be stagnant for some time while they figure out the world, but eventually they have to take action. If they never take action, they're not exactly the protagonist, are they? They're just some bystander in a story that happens to be happening to the world around them. So for you, it's important for you to know where you want your character to end up so that you can begin working towards that. And if the story happens and things change and it doesn't go how you want, okay, great, that's awesome, go with that, but at least you have a goal in mind. And if your character were to die, never forget, if you want a character's death to be tragic, don't let them achieve the goal they were shooting for. Don't let them complete their character arc. In my mind, nothing is more boring than a character dying and you not caring because you didn't know where they were going in the first place. So identify that need in your character. Identify where they are going and try and make sure that you have that in the back of your mind, not necessarily just where your character wants to be, but where you want them to be. The artificer I played wanted to eventually betray the entire party. He wanted to get the best of them and take everything he could from them. I wanted him to be faced with his toxic ways and eventually figure out that that was not a way to live life. Guess which of those two he ended up doing? Yeah, he ended up learning the error of his ways. But he never would have done that if the only goal I had was his in-character goal, not my goal of where I hoped he would be sometime. And there was a possibility where the events of the story and the dice led him down the wrong path, and if that was the case, so be it. I would probably have let him die at the party's hands as he never learned his lesson. That also would have been a good story, but it would have been even more tragic because there would have been the potential of him being redeemed because I would have always had that in the back of my head. And that makes a character worth playing because people care and there are stakes. D&D is collaborative. It's all about the table and the people around you, so it's important to know who they are and what they care about. If you don't look at them and if you don't pay attention to them, it's not really collaborative storytelling. You're just trying to tell your own story and there happen to be other people there that you hope act as an audience. But that's not what it's supposed to be. In order to be a good player, you have to be a good communicator. Somebody who's able to communicate with everybody else and care about where they're going because that's the entire point. So ultimately, how do you be a good player? Be a good friend to every single person at that table, even if they're strangers. Treat them as you would want to be treated. And if you do that, I guarantee you, you will be a good player and you will have a great game. So go out and have a great game, you beautiful bastards. Don't forget to go out to the world and make it your own. Don't forget to have a great day, and never forget to play your role. Thank you. Come again.